Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Devin with Jurassic Magic, and in today's video, I wanted to focus on the last Precon from Tarkir Dragonstorm. I previously upgraded the other 4 Precons, and I only have one left with the Temur Roar. And I gotta say, before I looked at the deck list, this was my most anticipated one because it's all about ramp and dragons, what's not to love about this. But the more I dived into the deck, the more I realized this definitely needs some fine tuning. If you haven't looked at the deck list yourself, you'll notice that there's a lot of red creatures, and we can kind of mix that up a little bit. And if you are new to my Precon upgrades, I will first focus on talking about the new cards, and then later on I will discuss 10 cuts and 10 add-ons that you could have in your deck to make it a little bit more powerful. And so now with that said, let's get it started. Let's upgrade this deck. So in this deck, you have two different choices. You have the face commander of the deck and the secondary commander. Let's go over Eshki Temur's Roar, which is the main commander of this deck. For 1 green, blue, and red, legendary creature, human warrior. Whenever you cast a creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Eshki. If that spell's power is 4 or greater, draw a card. If that spell's power is 6 or greater, Eshki deals damage equal to Eshki's power to each opponent. And she has 2 power and 2 toughness. So this one is quite good. It just focuses on casting creature spells. The higher the mana cost, the more you are going to get out of it. Buffing yourself, drawing you cards, and dealing damage is the way to go with Eshki, and that's definitely totally a Temur way of doing so. However, since this is a dragon deck, or any of the written, the secondary Precon commander of the deck is definitely more of the strategy you want to go along. Even though it does cost 4 more mana, that's quite a bit. It does have a really good payoff. So for 4 green, blue, and a red, it has flying and trample. Whenever enters or attacks, look at the top 8 cards of your library. You may put a dragon creature card from among them onto the battlefield, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And the reason why you might want to gravitate towards this commander more than the other one is the fact that there's 30 total dragons in this deck. I mean, I might take out some here and there, but 30 dragons digging that deep into your library, you're bound to find something. But obviously you can build around Eshki because it's just a value engine for yourself. If you want to make this with your dragon deck, you're more than welcome to. But I personally feel like Areni of the Written is one powerful commander and what I'm definitely building myself. Additionally, in Precons, you do get new cards, and this one is packed full of dragons. Let's start off small talking about Deceptive Frostkite. This is only just 2 blue mana. It has flying, and you may have this creature enter as a copy of a creature you control with power 4 or greater, except it's a dragon in addition to its other types and has flying. This is pretty powerful just because it's just a clone for 2 mana. Obviously it has a stipulation of only targeting a creature you control with power 4 or greater copying it, but having a second copy of another big dragon you have can be pretty powerful. Another card I really like in here is Thundermane Dragon. This is only 4 mana, and you may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may cast creature spells with power 4 or greater from the top of your library. If you cast a creature spell this way, it gains haste until on a turn. I like this a ton. It's almost like an extra card in your hand looking at the top card of your library. It's very valuable because you know what your next draw is going to be, or if you just cast the big creature, you totally could. It definitely feels like a green effect, but I'm glad it's in red. Another red dragon I would like to highlight is Parapet Thrasher. This is also 4 mana. It has whenever one or more dragons you control deal combat damage to an opponent, choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. Destroy target artifact opponent controls. This creature deals 4 damage to each other opponent, or exile the top card of your library. You may play this turn. So what's pretty cool about this card is the fact that if you swing at one opponent and swing 2 other dragons at each other opponent, you can get all these effects. Destroying an artifact, getting some sort of card advantage, and dealing damage is very good, especially for a 4 mana value creature. But let's move on to the next dragon. There's so many new dragons in this deck. I'm super excited for them. Hammerhead Tyrant is incredible. It's a great control piece for 6 mana. It has flying with a 6/6 body. Whenever you cast a spell, return up to 1 target non-land permanent and opponent controls with mana value less than or equal to that spell's mana value to its owner's hand. So since the good chunk of this deck is a lot of high CMC spells, you're going to be returning a lot of non-land permanents to their owner's hands. This almost feels like a Hullbreaker Horror. Obviously not as busted, but still pretty decent. But I did want to save the best dragon for last, at least in my opinion. It's the one that I like the most out of this deck, and that's Broodcaller Scourge. This is 7 mana for a flying creature with a 5/7 body. Whenever one or more dragons you control deal combat damage to a player, you may put a permanent card with mana value less than or equal to the damage from your hand onto the battlefield. So this kind of goes back into that text whenever one or more dragons you control deal combat damage to a player. So if you swing 1 dragon at one opponent and the other 2 at the other 2 opponents, you get this trigger 3 times. And depending on the type of damage, let's just say Broodcaller Scourge swung at an opponent and dealt 5 damage to them, you can put something like a Thundermane Dragon directly onto the battlefield for free. Broodcaller Scourge seems very powerful, very splashy. It and I think will make it a significant impact in the deck. So those are the new dragons. I wanted to highlight one more card that I believe is going to be an instant staple in a lot of different decks that I have personally, and that's Will of the Temur. Out of all the Wills, this is actually my favorite one. So let's read what it does for 5 and a blue, so 6 mana total. I know that seems very steep compared to the rest, but trust me, this one is absolutely worth it. Choose one. If you control a commander as you cast the spell, you may choose both instead. So the first mode reads, create a token that's a copy of target permanent, except it's a 4/4 creature with flying in addition to its other types. And the second mode does read, target player draws cards equal to the greatest mana value among permanents you control. So the first part is pretty good. You create a token that's a copy of any permanent on the battlefield. You could copy a land like a Gaia's Cradle if you don't have one on the battlefield. You could copy an opponent's Jurassic, Study, One Ring, or even a big splashy creature. The list could go on and on. It's going to be a 4/4 dragon in addition to its other types with flying, but that's completely okay because we're getting that value. And not only that, on the second mode, we get to draw a serious amount of cards. It obviously scales with the type of permanent we have on the battlefield. Let's just say our commander's out on the battlefield. We get to draw 7 cards. And I feel like we're going to draw a lot more cards than not because of the high CMC dragons we do control. So this one is excellent. I'm super excited to put this in a lot of different decks because this gives you card draw and a clone option. So now that I've mentioned some of the new cards, I wanted to now go into the topic of taking out cards and putting new cards in that'll help boost up the power level of this deck. So looking at the deck list, I gotta tell you straight up, there's going to be a lot of upgrades you may want to consider. You might even go with 20 upgrades to cut in and cut out, but today I'm just going to go over 10 just to make it a little bit more simplified. So let's go over some cards that you probably cut and replace with. So for example, there's a ton of dragons in this deck that are red CMC, and a lot of them are pretty much just draft chaffed or not good enough for the deck, at least in my opinion. So cards like Gadrick, the Crown Scourge is okay. I don't think it's that good, especially in Commander. The clause of getting treasure is based off of creatures dying on your turn, and I don't think that's the best. I'm also not a big fan of Opportunistic Dragon, because when it enters the battlefield, you basically take control of a human or an artifact, and it loses all abilities. If they didn't lose all abilities, then it would be a different story, so I don't necessarily think this is worth it in the deck. Turian Mauler is another card I just thought, why not just put another dragon in this deck instead of just a shapeshifter? I understand it is just 3 mana, but I don't necessarily think it's a great fit because if you're playing a dragon deck, you really want to be playing a dragon deck and not just a shapeshifter in there. So if you notice something about these 3 dragons, or should I say kind of dragons with a shapeshifter, is the fact that they are low CMC. I would prefer putting more ramp in this deck, like Rampant Growth, Revisits, or Nature's Lore. These low CMC ramp spells will help us get our dragons out earlier instead of just playing early dragons. These ones are not even the best in my opinion. I'd rather ramp into the big ones that I want to play. But shifting back into some cuts, I am still going along with some of the dragons in the deck. Again, there's a lot of dragons I'm like, well, you definitely don't necessarily need those in the deck. Territorial Hellkite is another one that I think it's okay, but it's not really the best. I feel like it was definitely better in the early days of Commander, but not so much now. The same can be applied for Varric's Bladewing. It's really just only a vanilla 4/4 for 4 mana. Obviously, if you kick it for 3, you get 2 copies of it on the battlefield. Obviously, it's a different legendary that you make a token copy of. Again, it's okay. I just don't really think it's that good, and honestly, I'm surprised it's still even at Mythic. I would replace these 2 with some counter spells. Some cheaper options that I could think of are an Offer You Can't Refuse and Strict Serenade. These typically are auto-includes in my decks because they're great counter spells. An Offer You Can't Refuse can counter a non-creature spell, all for 1 blue mana. You will have to get an opponent 2 treasure tokens, but I feel like that's not a big downside. I also love Strict Serenade because if somebody has a big creature that they want to play, like a Craterhoof Behemoth, or if somebody's casting like a One Ring, you could just counter that, and you're just giving them a 2/2 bird. I feel like that's a great trade-off. Strict Serenade is completely underrated in my opinion. And again, I know I feel like I'm taking out a lot of dragons and putting a lot of non-dragons in the deck, and I completely understand that. Again, we have a total of 30 dragons in this deck. I feel like we could cut some and maybe put a couple in, but we definitely want to have some countermeasures and some ramp. But I do want to take out some more dragons. I know you're probably getting sick of me taking out all these dragons, but really, to make a more functional deck, all these high CMC dragons have probably got to go. Vengeful Ancestor is another one I think is okay. I don't think it's the greatest thing in the world, especially in a dragon deck where we want to focus on dragons. When this creature enters or attacks, go target creature, which can be a good upside for us, and whenever creature attacks that's goaded, it deals 1 damage to its controller. So this is okay. I think there are some other better dragons that we could get along with in this deck. Steel Hellkite I feel like is in every dragon Precon. Definitely one that you could take out. It is okay. I do like how it can destroy each non-land permanent with mana value X, depending on how much you pay into the X ability, and it can buff itself up. But again, I feel like there's other dragons that we could take advantage of in the deck. So as for replacements for those 2 dragons, depending on your budget. A lot of dragons have been going up in price because of this set coming out. There has been a lot of hype for certain cards, and their prices have already skyrocketed. I don't want to mention those cards. I already have another deck video that I'm coming out with, like an Ultimate Dragon deck with Irene of the Unwritten, that will be posted in a future date, so definitely subscribe to stay tuned. However, in this video, I'm going to go over dragons that are basically like $10 or less. I don't want to go too crazy with the dragon prices because a lot of them are pretty expensive, like Ancient Copper Dragon or even Old Gnawbone. One dragon I was super surprised was not on this list was Scourge of Valkas. This one is incredible because it can be a potential win con for you. Whenever it or another dragon enters the battlefield under your control, it deals X damage to any target where X is the number of dragons you control, and it does have a fire breathing ability. So if you have a lot of dragons entering one by one, this could deal exponential amount of damage. I also think Uvara Hellkite is another great option if you want to go more wide with the dragons. Whenever a dragon you control attacks, create a 6/6 red dragon creature token with flying. This could be incredible, especially with something like Scourge of Valkas, or if you swing it with like 5 dragons, you're going to have 5 6/6s coming on the battlefield, and they're all going to trigger with Scourge of Valkas, dealing a ton of damage. Uvara Hellkite is another card that is a great game ender. It was reprinted recently in Ravnica Remastered, so it can be a pretty good pickup at this range, around less than $10. So again, I believe these are two really good fits in the deck, but we still have 2 more cuts that I wanted to go over, and that would be Dragon Master Outcast and Dragon Lord Servant. To me, I'm not a big fan of Dragon Lord Servant. I'd rather just get a rampant growth on the battlefield, get an extra land so I can cast some more stuff. However, I do understand the cost reduction. We do have some other cost reduction cards in this deck that I'm not too worried about with Dragon Lord Servant, so I believe Dragon Master Outcast and Dragon Lord Servant can be cut. They are cheaper options, but again, I'd rather have the cheaper options be ramped so that we can ramp into the bigger dragons. I would replace one with Fanatic of Ronas. This is an excellent mana dork that you could have in the deck. It's a regular mana dork, but if you have Ferocious, you could tap for 4 mana, and it can be eternalized later on. Again, dragons are expensive. Having a mana dork that could tap for 4 green mana is huge. And the last card I would substitute in is Balefire Dragon, and this is one incredible board wipe. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, it deals that much damage to each other creature that player controls, and it has a 6/6 body. So dealing 6 damage to each creature most likely is going to kill each creature that player controls. This is a great board wipe. Again, it's really good, especially because we don't have black or white. We don't really have that much board wipes. This is a way where we could deal some combat damage, kill some creatures, and go screaming in for victory. But now that is going to do it for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and watching this video on upgrading the Temur Precon deck. Let me know down below in the comments, what are your thoughts about this deck? Do you plan on buying it yourself, or do you plan on buying the singles? For me, I was about to buy this deck, but after seeing the deck list, I thought, it's better to just buy the singles for this one. Again, just to remind you, I do plan on making a really good Irene of the Unwritten deck. I will be posting it sometime this week or even next week, so stay tuned by subscribing. And with that out of the way, thank you for stomping by.